You were born in the 1940s, and I wonder what it was like growing up first in New York, then in LA as Russian Jewish immigrants.
Well, so I was born in New York City in the Lower East Side. I do remember that my most favorite place to be in New York City was Central Park, and that was pretty exciting. My parents were very poor. They came to the United States from Russia, and they thought that we were going to sort of arrive in the land of milk and honey. And it was actually not the land of milk and honey because it was the Depression. They had a lot of financial issues, and my father had a career that didn't pay a lot, of course, unless you're famous. He,
He was
was
an
an artist.
artist.
Yeah, an artist. And so if you see those artists around, you know that they're not making a lot of money, most of them. There's just a few that are making a lot of money. So we didn't have a lot of money, and my father thinking that, well, perhaps the world would be better for him if he went west. The idea was, "Go west, young man." And so he went to California when I was about 5.5 years old. And that was quite the experience as well, because we went from being in the city to being literally in the middle of the country. The roads were all dirt. They didn't pave the roads. The houses were spread far apart. There were grapevines everywhere. So it was a dramatic change. And for me as a child, I liked both of them because I liked New York. I liked the Central Park. I liked being able to go and play near the water. They have those cute ponds there and ice skating. But I also really liked Los Angeles because it was very rural and there weren't a lot of rules. And it was exciting for me to be there. But at that same time, my brother was born, my younger brother, and being in an Orthodox Jewish family, it became very apparent that boys are valued and girls are not. And that happens in a lot of societies. Culturally, that is not unpopular. My
Brother.
dad told me specifically when my brother was born that my brother was now much more important than me. And I, of course, didn't understand. I was only 5, and I didn't believe him. I thought, "Well, something must be the matter with he's having a bad day." And it turned out that it was true. And the way that it manifests itself was that they just spent a lot more time with him, and all the resources that we had went for things for him. Whether it was clothes or toys or whatever it was, he got all of it. I was not thrilled with this idea, but I adapted to it. I just figured you just have to cope with it. They expected me to do so much on my own that I became empowered. I was very smart. I was able to do a lot of things for myself. And because my brother was so pampered, he ended up being much more dependent. I'd have one more brother. The one just after me was 5 years younger. And then the other one was 8 years younger than me. So then it was 2 to 1, 2 boys and 1 girl, right? I really liked my brother, and they didn't know that they were supposed to be more special than me. They just knew that they got a lot more advantages than I did. Somehow it didn't affect me. I don't know why, but it didn't. When my youngest brother was roughly 16, 18 months old, we had a tragedy in the family, which was terrible, really. He was playing on the kitchen floor with a bottle, and he accidentally opened the bottle, and it happened to be aspirin, and he took it. He ate, of all things. I don't know how he could have done it. And then my mother called the doctor's office and asked what to do. And unfortunately, either he wasn't listening to her or the fact that she didn't pay full price because we were not well enough to pay full price. Who knows what happened with what he was thinking? But what happened is that he told her information that was wrong. He said, "Put him to bed and see how he is in 2 hours." Well, you never do that. When somebody ingests a poison, the first thing you do is run to the hospital and get it out. So my mother listened, and in 2 hours, he was violently ill. So we took him to a community hospital where they pumped his stomach, but they don't have a facility to keep them there. They give you a shot or pump your stomach or whatever, but then you have to go home. He was so sick, he needed to be kept in a hospital. So we went from one hospital to another hospital, and we found about a third hospital. The reason that we didn't go into the first hospital, they wouldn't accept him because we had no proof of payment. So in the US, they have this terrible system, not all over the US, now it's changed, where if you can't prove that you're going to pay, they won't take care of you. There was no proof of payment. So by the time we got to the third or fourth hospital, it was already too late. He died an hour after we got there. So this left a huge mark on me and it impacted my life. I think it impacted the lives of my children as well. Because what it said to me is that if you don't take care of yourself, nobody else will. And you need to be able to read and be educated and understand what's going on in your world, or you won't be alive. And so I turned from sort of a lackadaisical student who was, I was okay, I wasn't great, into somebody that wanted to know everything. I was just an ordinary student. That was about fourth grade that happened. By the time I was in seventh grade, I realized that being educated was the most important thing I could do to get myself out of poverty, to get myself out of the situation I was living in. And so I became a really good student. I made it my goal to get a college education. But in Orthodox Jewish families, girls don't go to college. They get married and they have children. And so I was 18. My parents thought it would be a great idea for me to get married. Why not? They already picked out somebody that looked like a good candidate. And I was not interested in that at all. I decided I wanted to go to school, University of California, Berkeley. Just happens to be one of the top schools in the country. But I managed to get in. Not only did I manage to get in, I got a scholarship.
You apply without your parents knowing.
They didn't know that I applied. And my parents basically disowned me financially. They're like, you want to go to college? You have to pay for it all yourself. We're not paying anything, nothing whatsoever. I'm not even going to drive you there. So I got there on the bus. Dad, it was tough having no money, and everybody else came to college. They seemed to have a lot more money. What I did is I got jobs. I worked. I was a after school playground supervisor for kids. That didn't pay very much, but it was fun. My most lucrative job was I was a model, and that paid a lot. So I did a lot of modeling. But yeah, just by chance, I happened to be very tall and thin. And it turns out that's what they look for when you model, because my parents were short. My mother was 5'2", very small, and my father was about 3 inches shorter than me, 5'7". And everybody was like, where did she come from? They think their answer was, oh, she just has so much better nutrition because in Russia, the nutrition was not that great. So that's what happened in terms of me being able to be a model. So I went through University of California at Berkeley and I got a degree.
I wonder what it was that drove you because it was so difficult. Your family wasn't supporting you. You had to do so many, many jobs in addition to, I think you were one of the very first in your family to go to college.
I was the first.
Did you feel as
It
though once you have a college degree, that's enough education as opposed to let's finish high school, I have enough education to survive?
was sort of, I wanted to have more. I wanted to really understand what people were thinking and doing. And I realized that people that had a good education had a better economic outlook and they earned more money. Their lives seemed better. Somewhere around, I don't know, all my readings, I realized that I would have a better life if I had a college education. So that was it. I was going to get a college education and there was no question about it. I learned how to learn. That was probably the most important thing.
Mm.
And I learned how to cope in spite of all the stressful situations that I was in. You're right. I mean, I could have easily quit and then just gotten married. And in those days, when you got married, somebody took care of you. You just did nothing. You stayed home, you took care of the family, and you produced kids. The pressure on me to get married was intense. And so when I had just turned 21, I got married, and I'm still married to the same person. But I didn't do exactly what they wanted me to do because they wanted me to marry somebody that was also an Orthodox Jew. Instead, I married a Catholic. And so this threw the whole family into a tizzy. Yes, I was not seen as the well-behaving, obedient daughter. was not a good situation, but for me, it was good. I was happy that I
Yeah.
did that. I had a college degree and I had a husband, so that took care of that.
And what was the plan after that when you had your first child? Were you thinking, "Oh, I can't continue being a journalist. I need to be a full-time mother."
Well, when I had my first child, Susan, the rules were very different back then. When you were pregnant and you were a teacher, they forced you to quit. You could not teach and be pregnant at the same time. The philosophy was that if you're pregnant, you're giving people the wrong idea of what is good. So, fortunately, when I was pregnant, you could hardly see that I was pregnant. I'm so tall. The baby was able to like stretch up. And so I would manage to make it through to the ninth month before I finally quit. Wow. You couldn't even tell I was pregnant. It was very difficult. Of course, the doctors were worried because they didn't have ultrasounds back then. They're like, what kind of a baby could she be having? Because it's so small. And I remember there were 2 or 3 gynecologists in the room when she was born because they were like, there's probably going to be something the matter with this baby. Anyway, just so you know, she was 8.5 pounds and there was nothing the matter with her. Nothing. So it just was that's some people carry their children and you can't see it as much as you can with others. So I was very happy to stay home with her. I wanted to teach, but in that era, it was much harder to find babysitters. And women that worked, you were seen as an anomaly. It's like something might be the matter with you. Like, why in heaven's name would you be working? Don't you have enough money? And so my husband wanted me to stay home. And so I stayed home and I was very happy I did. I had a good time playing with my daughter. And on the side, I ended up being a writer. I was still a writer. I still worked, but I was a ghostwriter. I don't know if you know what that ghostwriter is.
So you don't get the credit for the
You
rate.
don't get the credit, but you get paid. So I was a ghostwriter. That worked really well for me because I got to do something that was interesting and I got paid quite a bit and I got to take care of my daughter. And so she was so cute and so well behaved, this baby, incredible, that I decided right away, oh my God, I have to have another one. And so Janet was born 18 months. She's 18 months difference between Janet and Susan. And she was born pretty quickly. So that is the reason, because Susan was just a dream child. And Janet was much more aggressive, polite, and easy to get along with. And Janet was like, I want my milk now.
Wow. And what was your thought, first time you're having a child? I can't imagine there was a lot of material out there in terms of how do you parent. And I rather saw that you didn't also want to parent the way you had been parented. So you had to forge your way.
That's right. I did not want to be parenting the way that I had been parented. And so I had to forge away. And there were no books that I could find on how to parent. The main book that I used was a book called Dr. Spock. And I loved Dr. Spock. It was like I knew him. And I memorized that book, but it was all medical. Everything, if your child has a rash, if your child has a fever, if your child doesn't sleep on his stomach and should be sleeping on his back, he told you everything. And one thing he'd say that really had an impact, it was on the first page of his book, is basically believe your own gut instincts as a mother. And I thought, wow, that's the first time I've ever heard anyone say that. And I was just thinking about my poor mother. If she would have listened to her own gut instincts, if she would have been smart enough and felt like she could challenge the system, then that wouldn't have happened. But she was afraid to challenge the system. She was afraid to speak her mind, and she didn't listen to her own gut instincts. I mean, it just makes sense that if something goes in that is not supposed to be there, you need to get it out. And so I decided he was right, gut instincts. And so the main thing I wanted my children to do was to be independent. I wanted them all to be as independent as early as possible. And I gave them many opportunities to be independent. I taught them a lot of things that people probably never taught their kids early. I taught them how to swim early. I toilet trained them pretty early. I taught them how to make their own breakfast early. I taught them a lot of things that most people never taught their kids. They just waited around until it was more convenient or something. And it had an extraordinary impact that I did not anticipate. And the impact was that they felt very empowered. They felt like they were able to handle any situation. It was kind of remarkable. You know, you bring your child together with other kids in a little play group or whatever, and you let them all play. And there's kids that whine and kids that scream about things and kids that are not happy and kids that are always wanting their mother to do it for them. And I realized that my kids were very independent, that they could do a lot of things on their own. And I just continued doing that.
Weren't they also known as the lemon girls as well? And they would purchase lemons from a neighbor and sell it back to the neighbor.
Yes, right next door, there was this wonderful neighbor named Mr. Danzig, and they had this incredible lemon tree in their front yard, and it was prolific. Lots of lemons were like all over the place. My daughters asked them if they could pick the lemons. They said, sure. But they were thrilled they were picking the lemons because there were too many lemons. They put them in baskets, and then they walked up and down the street and sold lemons to everybody on the street, including the people whose lemon tree they had used. And those people, they were so nice. They bought the lemons. They were like 10 cents a lemon or something like that. That was their first business. They were the lemon girls. And that went so well. They earned a lot of money. Then they became creative in other kinds of businesses they could come up with. They created all kinds of handicraft things and they would sell them all the time. It was one thing after another. The neighbors, thank you, all those neighbors, for being so kind. They all bought their things, whatever they were selling. It was very nice of them.
You mentioned swimming. I mean, one of your children, she swam when she was 12 months
My
old. How did that happen?
Well, she was a very, very athletic child. She walked at 10 months, and this kid is so incredibly physical. I need to make sure she knows how to swim because she's the kind of kid that jumps in the pool when you turn your butt back for a minute. So I taught her how to swim. I bought a book, which I still have, by the way. The title of the book was not very creative. It was called How to Teach Your Baby to Swim. I didn't even know you could do that. And it worked. I followed it like a recipe, like making chocolate chip cookies. And she could swim. By the time she was 12 months old, she could swim from one side of the pool to the other. And babies can't do the overhand crawl. They swim kind of like fish. They do little dog paddle. So she would dog paddle and then she would come up for air and then dog paddle and come up for air. But she could swim across the whole pool with this dog paddle come up for air technique of hers. And Susan also learned to swim a little bit later. She was 20 months, but she could do a little bit more in traditional strokes. She kept her head out of the water and she would pull herself kind of a breaststroke style. By the time they were both 5 years old, though, they were on swim teams. And Anne was also on the swim team. Anne started on the swim team when she was 3 because her 2 older sisters were already on the swim team. She didn't want to be left out. So I just did it because A, it was fun, B, it was protective, and also they could be with a peer group and do fun activities, and it's exercise. So that was the main reason I did it, and it worked out. It was a really good activity for all of them.
You mentioned that you were forging your path. I imagine not everything you tried was successful. Any example come to mind in terms of what didn't take so well and how you thought about it and made it such that it was successful and fit your children's styles?
Well, there were some things that were not as successful as others. I think one of them was I should have taught them better table manners. Took me a long time to get them to have the proper table manners. And I think that I didn't do it because I projected on them that they were too little. And so since they're so little, they don't have to have good manners yet. And that was a mistake because once they got older, they still didn't have good table manners. And I think that kids stick with what they learn first when they're 2, 3, 4, 5. If they are getting away with bad manners when they're 1, 2, 3, it's very hard to change it. It's hard to say, well, now you're 5, you need to do this. So if I were to do it again, I would remember that even little babies can learn to be polite at the table. We lived in Switzerland when Anne was an infant, and I would go to the restaurants in France, in Geneva, and you would see a whole family there, and all the kids were sitting politely, including babies. And that's when I realized I should have done that early. And so I'd like to remind all parents out there, start it early. You will not regret it. They're just smarter than you think. Whatever you're starting early, they keep. They're like little mounds of clay. You mold them. By the time they're 5, they're already molded.
I imagine your style must have been seen as very unconventional, and it wouldn't have been possible if you didn't have a supportive partner. So your husband was a Stanford professor, and I wonder how the two of you parented together.
Well, he was a Stanford professor, still is a Stanford professor, and we agreed a lot on the parenting, but he was not there very much because Stanford professors work hard. And so I had more of an opportunity to be with the kids most of the time. But the way that we parented is that I did most of the day-to-day stuff during the week. And on the weekend, when he had time, he would do everything. We would go places on the weekend together with the kids. He had prioritized being a soccer coach for each of the girls' teams. So he did first Susan, then Janet, then Anne. And so that gave him an opportunity to work with them really well. And also, we did a lot of vacations. We traveled a lot together. And by the time Anne was 1.5, she'd already been in every European country because we lived in Geneva and we would drive all these places. So we agreed on pretty much everything connected with parenting, only I was the one that did it, and he was only there on the weekends.
And so when Anne was 5 years old, that's when you went back to work. What was that transition like? It must have been unusual for people to go back to work after having children.
It was very unusual. As a matter of fact, in my generation, my age group, no one went back to work. I now have a book group of all my friends. And in that book group, there was just one other woman and me that actually went back to work. All the rest of them stayed home.
Why did you go back? What was driving you?
Well, I was always passionate about helping kids and teaching and being a journalist. And this just gave me an opportunity to do something besides just stay home. I stayed home for 10 years. That was a long time. And I just wanted to have an opportunity to make an impact and to help other kids. I also wanted to be a journalist. It was very hard to be a journalist as a woman. In the 1960s and 70s, women were not journalists. It was an old boys club. I could not get into the San Francisco Press Club because I was a woman. I couldn't get into any press club. They had an honorary society for journalists, a separate one for men and a separate one for women. So things changed a lot. So I was fighting the system, but then I also wanted to work with other kids. I always liked being a teacher. I guess that's been one of my main passions in life, helping kids be the best they can be.
Palo Alto High School. What was the experience like?
Well, I first started teaching in 1980 as a substitute. I was okay, but then I was hired in 1984, and it was a very interesting experience for me. I had 5 classes. One of the classes was the journalism, and the way they taught was by having a textbook called Press Time for the journalism class. The kids read the book and then they answered the questions at the end of the chapter. Then they moved on the next week. They read the next chapter. And after that, they read the following chapter. And I realized without talking to anyone, no one was going to learn to be a journalist by reading that book ever. And I was going to get rid of the book. I was not tenured. And when you do things that are outside the system and you're not tenured, you are threatened with being fired. So I was very fearful, but I actually threw away the book. And then I waited to be fired. And the craziest thing that happened is they didn't even notice I threw away the book. They just didn't notice. So thank you for not noticing. But one thing that they did notice is that I also brought in what I called peer-to-peer learning, project-based peer-to-peer learning. That was not popular in the 1980s. As a matter of fact, that didn't exist in the 1980s. And so they got very upset. They said, your classes are too noisy. Kids should not be talking to each other. If you can't straighten this out, well, we're going to have to fire you. So I was a little shocked, but my husband said, well, if they fire you, it's no problem. You can work somewhere else, no problem. But what I decided to do was to tell my class. And I said to the students, by the way, we can't continue this way. Whenever somebody from the administration, the principal, the vice principal comes into the class, I want you to stop, do nothing, and just sit at your desk and read a book or something. Don't talk. And they're like, why? And I told them why. I told them, like, I'm going to be fired if you don't do that. If you still want this teacher, then you're going to have to work together with me. Worked like a charm. The kids were like little mice, not a sound in the class. So I passed. And, and then and I was very grateful. And then after that, I got tenure. And once you get tenure, it's very hard to fire a teacher. And so then I changed my whole system to student directed, project based learning that really was very effective.
What does that mean?
Well, what it means is that the teacher might explain something, and then you let the kids talk about what it was that you just explained. And then you let them also have some kind of project connected with what you explained. So, for example, I would explain like how to write a news story and give a lot of tips for doing that. Then next step is you talk to your group. There's a little group. What did you hear? What kind of information is important? How should you write a news story? And then the group came up with topics of their own, what they wanted to write a news story about. The project is they wrote a news story, and I actually gave them subjects to write about or topics to write about. But as they became more advanced, they could find their own topics. Finding out what to write about is one of the challenges, and being able to interview people and get the information is also one of the challenges. So they learned how to do that really well, and they learned to do it by doing it, not by reading a book about it. They loved it so much they told their friends. And then my classes grew. They doubled in size the next year. All their friends decided to take it. And it doubled again the following year. And within the next 10 years, I had 100 kids in the class. And this was too many. I mean, I started some more publications. So if you read the book, you'll see that there's a story of all the publications. I started with one, 1984. By the year 1999, I started another publication, and then every 2 years after that, another publication. So today, there are 10 publications and over 700 kids in the program and 5 media arts teachers.
Isn't it the largest journalism program in the States right now?
It's the largest journalism program in the States. It's larger than any university. It's huge.
Incredible. I love that, you've said that in the publications, the students decide for themselves what to write. And it looks professional. It looks like any other professional newspaper out there.
Yes, that's right. Students love the fact that they can write about whatever it is they want to write about. And it's a group effort. The newspapers are fantastic. Newspapers, magazines, they're beautiful. And they can see them if they go online. There's one called issuu.com, issue. And that is probably the place where you can see all the publications, or go to Palo Alto High School and Palo Alto High School journalism. And there's a link to all the publications on Palo Alto High School journalism. That's probably the easiest way to get it.
It wasn't in the fall of 1987. I've read in your book that that's when you got 7 free Macintosh. What was that story and how did it change
So,
your grade?
as you know, when I first started in 1984, we were publishing on a typewriter. And I don't know if you've ever typed on a typewriter, but most of the time you make a mistake. And then if you make a mistake, it's a big problem. You have to erase it. We had all these different techniques for eliminating mistakes. We learned how to network them together. They had just opened up this store in Palo Alto called Fry's Electronics. I was able to take the kids, I would take large groups of kids, maybe 20 of them, shopping, and we would go and look at all the equipment that Apple had in the store, or IBM had in the store, all the different computers that were in the store. We learned a lot by going shopping. Can you believe? Teacher and all the students going shopping. That was pretty exciting. And then I used it to publish the newspaper. It was incredible.
I love that you would bring your students in and just share the fact that you didn't know these things. And I imagine a lot of teachers, the reasons why they don't admit that is because, oh, I might not be respected because I'm no longer the authority. But it seems like the exact opposite has happened in this case.
The exact opposite has happened, right? The fact that I admitted I didn't know something, it gave them also the freedom to admit when they didn't know something, because if the teacher does it, then they do it as well. And so then you can learn together, which is basically what we did. We learned together. We used this program with these floppy disks that had limited space. We had to figure out how to adjust those disks so that it could save the paper in the way that we wanted to save it. We learned a lot, but they taught me, I taught them occasionally, it was incredible. And so this was 1987. By 19, I think it was 92, 93, whenever, the middle of the 90s, Steve Jobs heard about it and came in. And he pulled his oldest daughter, Lisa, out of private school to put her in the program. He would sit in the class and watch what I was doing. And I never figured out what he wanted to find out. But in retrospect, I think he was just watching how the kids were using the computers. It was very interesting. He was very helpful to me. He was super nice. I know there's a lot of books out there that say he was difficult and hard to work with, but I never saw Steve Jobs like that. Never. He was always incredibly helpful and nice to me. One thing I always appreciated is he was very direct. He told you what he liked and he didn't like. There were no playing games or no clouds. He told you. I found that very refreshing.